Welcome to Plus One Forward, the podcast powered by the Apocalypse, where we talk about tabletop role-playing games using or inspired by the Apocalypse engine. I'm your MC, Rach, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Rich.
Hey, Rach! It's so great to be on the horns with you.
Depending on what interviews come out before this episode, it's been a while since we've been on the same podcast, I think.
It has, and this has been a long time coming for this particular episode. I am so excited to finally get on the mics with you about this one.
So why don't you share to our listeners what today's topic is?
Well, in case you haven't looked at the show title, this episode we are talking about Mad Max Fury Road, paired with Apocalypse World 2nd Edition. Now, as a reminder, this is only the second in the series of movie nights. And in movie nights, partially inspired by the podcast Sharkbone, we talk about a particular movie, but we also pair it with a particular Powered by the Apocalypse game. We kicked it off with Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse and paired that with Masks: A New Generation. Two great tastes that taste great together, and this one is where we go back to the grand poobah of Powered by the Apocalypse, the one that started it all, but we're talking about the 2nd edition, Apocalypse World, and one of my favorite movies.
Yeah, this is a particular pairing of game and movie I am really passionate about and super excited to talk about tonight.
Oh, me too. Witness me! Sorry.
Oh, man, I really miss the witness me jokes. I remember being around conventions in 2015 and people screaming witness me at each other. I'm so glad you're bringing it back, Rich.
Yes, let's bring it back. It's like sexy.
So a little bit of history time for me. When this movie came out in 2015, gosh, that was a while ago, it had a big impact on my gaming career. The film was released while I was away on vacation, so I had to wait a bit to see it. But my partner, Rob, God bless him, went off and saw it without me while I was away at Disney World. We talked about it after on the phone. I was sitting by the pool at our house we were renting in Florida, and he was back home in Toronto. And I could remember this conversation really vividly. I could tell you exactly what I was drinking. And I do remember circling over and over to the idea of, what is this going to mean for Apocalypse World? Because this movie sounds amazing. So as soon as I saw Fury Road when I got back, immediately we went looking for an Apocalypse World campaign because we had to get it on this while it was hot. And we found a group with a bunch of players who had also just seen Mad Max and were really tuned into what this movie brought and what this movie could mean for Apocalypse World. And we really wanted to play more of that. I had mixed feelings on Apocalypse World before because I had been part of some really weak campaigns and one-shots. But I was willing to give it another shot. And that campaign of Apocalypse World that was directly inspired by Mad Max Fury Road really showed me how thoughtful and complex the game could be. I think it's fair to say that without Fury Road, I wouldn't be on this podcast right now.
Awesome.
So with all movie night episodes, we will introduce the game and the movie spoiler-free, and we'll have a spoiler cutoff when we start exploring spoiler territory. So we'll keep everything relatively clean in terms of describing the movie and the game, and then we will clearly mark for anyone who hasn't seen the movie a spot to turn the podcast off, put it on pause, go see the movie, and then come back completely fresh from your movie experience and ready to dig into all that spoiler-heavy material and discussion.
Great. Thanks, Rach. All right, let's dive in. Tell me about Mad Max Fury Road. Plot and major characters. Hit me with it.
A bunch of people go on a drive. There's some detours and complications along the way. It's generally a hard day for everyone involved.
Wow, that sounds really boring. Come on, all right, what is it really?
So to keep this as spoiler-free as possible, after an energy crisis, the world has collapsed into a post-apocalyptic hellscape. Max, oh shit, his name is awful.
Rockatansky.
Okay. Max Rockatansky is a former cop and now a road warrior. He roams the wasteland with no attachments to other people, but harbors a lot of deep emotional trauma. Max ends up captured by the forces of a community called the Citadel and is used as a living blood supply for injured troops. The Citadel is one of 3 communities located close together in the desert. All three are in an active trading relationship with each other. Gastown and the Bullet Farm export gas and bullets, while the Citadel exports water pulled up from the deep underground well. During what should be a routine trade mission, the war rig, driven by the Citadel's Imperator Furiosa, makes an unexpected detour off of the established route. Immortan Joe, the leader of the Citadel, uncovers that his forces aren't quite as faithful as he thought. Then there's lots of driving, car chases, upsetting plot twists.
So many.
While this is the fourth Mad Max film, rest assured you can jump into the series with this film.
Mm-hmm.
The Mad Max films are a loose continuity as is and are pretty self-contained. If you do want to go back and start from the beginning, keep in mind the first film actually takes place during a breakdown of civilization rather than afterward. It's a dystopian movie, not a post-apocalyptic movie. Don't be confused like little Rach was when she was a teenager.
Oh, poor little Rach. It was so weird.
Why were there cops? Why are there police? Why was there law enforcement on the highways? I thought we were going to start with Road Warrior. I was very confused. As of this recording in August 2019, the film has been released into home video. When I tried to stream it in Canada, I found I had to rent the movie rather than stream it from a service. Your access may vary depending on your country. There's two versions of the movie, the standard release and the black and chrome release, which is a black and white cut. Rich, have you watched the black and chrome release?
I haven't. I saw it in 2D and 3D in the theater. 3D has some really wonderful moments, but the vistas are so incredible in this movie that I personally prefer 2D so that I can look anywhere and everywhere. And I do have it on Blu-ray.
There is so much going on in every frame of this movie. I'm pretty sure when I saw it initially, it was in 3D, and the black and chrome cut I saw in 2D. Black and chrome, if you get the opportunity to watch it, is unnerving. Removing the color made the action easier to follow on screen, but it also revealed all of the violence and all of the impact. It made me stop and go, gee, I don't know if the good guys are going to win this time. Definitely check it out if you get the opportunity, but I might start with the color version first.
I will check out black and chrome soon.
Well, it's on your Blu-ray, right?
It is not.
What?
You have to buy it separate. You have to buy a separate Blu-ray. It's like $30.
I think in Canada it's sold in a combo pack now, or at least it was on Amazon.
Oh, lucky you. All right.
Apocalypse World. What's this Apocalypse World thing?
Apocalypse World is the first Powered by the Apocalypse game. It's a seminal work by Vincent and Mackay Baker to emulate post-apocalyptic action and drama. To me, Apocalypse World, when I first came to it, was this wild and confusing enigma. There are phrases and terms in this game that have infected my thinking about all tabletop role-playing games.
Isn't that what sticks in people's minds about Apocalypse World, though? A sometimes confusing game that also changes how you think about games?
Yeah, I remember the first time that I was given a pick list as a result of a move, and I said, wait, I only get what's on this list? This is BS, because I can think of 20 other things I would rather happen. I got mad. I mean, that's what it was like running into this thing for the first time. Now, all I can do is think of cool little pick lists that don't give you everything you want. It's crazy. To talk about Apocalypse World, from my, at the time, D&D oriented mind, classes became playbooks, feats became moves, a variety of die types and different results for different situations became 2d6, with the results of 6 minus, 7 to 9, and the ever seductive and fleeting 10 plus. Weapons had fixed damage, losing hit points became a harm clock, and sometimes getting a little hurt could end up being really bad. Relationships between PCs were formalized by HX, and you could play the game with just a few cheat sheets and your own, very own playbook. And that's just a glimpse at what's amazing for players.
Okay, Powered by the Apocalypse nerd check-in time. What is your favorite playbook?
Oh man, I think if you were to ask me at different times, I'd give you different answers right now. I would go with the Chopper, which is the kind of biker gang leader character. I've seen so many cool choppers in games that I've run, and I've played a few choppers that are near and dear to my heart. I'll never forget Lars the Chopper. So, Chopper, what about you? What's your favorite playbook?
I really like the Quarantine in first edition, but my heart's always stuck with the driver.
Nice.
Even though I don't have a full driver's license. I just really like that motif of being the drifter and being really tuned into your surroundings and clued in interesting ways. I found them the most compelling of the more combat-related playbooks because you can fight with your car. That was really cool. And yeah, just fucking love drivers so much.
I'll let it pass about the driver's license thing because it's not like I have a biker gang hanging around myself. So, okay, it's cool. For MCs, Apocalypse World was either a revelation or an evolution. This was the first game I saw where you were directed to be fans of your players' characters. Sure, that was a thing I already did, but like being given permission for that to be part of how you're supposed to run the game was so freeing. Failing forward is baked into the rules. You were given a menu of GM reactions or moves, instructions on when to deploy them, given a license to homebrew the game for your own needs. It was and is marvelous.
I found gamers who struggle with Powered by the Apocalypse often get games to click for them when they look at the MC section. Even things like the MC doesn't roll really twist your perspective of what a game should look like from the GM seat. I witnessed a lot of friction over that particular point. A lot of expectations that if you aren't rolling, what's the challenge?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot to be said about Apocalypse World, but I think some space should be made to note that not every listener might be familiar with the game. I've definitely run con games and one-shots where I get players with lots of Powered by the Apocalypse experience, but not so much Apocalypse World experience. As Rich mentioned above, the game is focused around post-apocalyptic action and drama. Players often find themselves in roles within after-the-end communities that have risen up after the fall of the Golden Age.
Mm-hmm.
As we touched on in an earlier episode, there's not much of a off-the-shelf setting for Apocalypse World. Let me go back through the +1 forward archives and pull out our notes from the settings episode.
Back. It's creaking of like you're opening up this old cabinet, you're pulling out this big book, like flipping through pages.
I did a search on Google Docs. So from my notes for settings, there's a 2-paragraph setting introduction on page 8 of Apocalypse World 2nd Edition. To shorten it even further, the important points are nobody really remembers why the world ended. Older characters may have experienced the end during their childhood. The world fundamentally changed from what it was, and there's something called the psychic maelstrom that everyone is connected to. Often I find the world of Apocalypse World defaults to a Mad Maxian apocalypse with the groups I play with, or rather what people remember Mad Max's apocalypse to be. Because it's such a well-known touchstone, at least within the nerd circles I run in. That said, I think that what George Miller feels the apocalypse should feel and look like is more fluid and changes between each of his Mad Max movies. Let that be your inspiration to be flexible and change with the times as we drill a little bit deeper into Fury Road and how it can inform your Apocalypse World games.
It's a brief aside talking about settings in Apocalypse World. I've found Apocalypse World to be, as a game, incredibly flexible for that apocalypse. As long as you follow those tenets that you talked about a moment ago from our ancient Google Doc. I have run Apocalypse World as a snowpocalypse. I've been in a swamp apocalypse. One person ran a game where there were big giga monsters that roamed the streets of Tokyo, and we lived in the husks of skyscrapers. I'm currently, as of this recording, in the middle of a series of games of Apocalypse World, pretty much straight up set on Tatooine in Star Wars during the original trilogy. So it is a very flexible apocalypse that you can have.
Yeah, I've played in a space apocalypse in my first game, I think, which was a convention game. And we said, well, we don't really want to do desert. We want to do space. And the game worked beautifully for that.
Doomsday Seattle by Tony Dowler, which is a map and guidebook, is an incredible, cannot recommend it highly enough, setting that you can use for a killer apocalypse world game.
This is your spoiler break, the point in a movie night episode where Rich and I will be shifting away from spoiler-free discussion to freely spoiling anything that we want to. We'll give you all a second to pause the podcast if you want. Come back and join us when you're ready to restart.
Please watch it. If you haven't seen it, super watch Mad Max Fury Road. All right, let's do it. Playbook talk.
What playbooks, if any, do we see in the movie, and how were they best embodied? I think we're going to have a lot to talk about here, Rich.
I think so, too. I think that there are only a few player characters in this movie.
There's a lot of NPCs in interesting places. And even with those player characters, they embody some aspects of certain playbooks, but also at the same time explore concepts from other playbooks. It's almost like these characters have been around the block a few times and taken a couple of level ups.
Yeah, they've gotten a few advancements where they've taken a move from other playbooks, and that's how I'm going to justify it.
Let's start with the obvious question. This movie is called Fury Road. Who's the driver? I want to lean towards Max being the driver, but that's informed by Miller's earlier movies where gas is more of a rarity. Fury Road is a movie full of drivers. There's plenty of gas and not much water. Water is the shortage the plot hinges on. Max loses his car early in the movie, and that makes him a weaker candidate for the driver by the end of the story. While we linger on the driver playbook, I want to highlight the move Weather Eye. Max's hallucinations are easily justified with the psychic maelstrom, but interacting with the maelstrom frequently requires a decent weird stat. Max doesn't strike me as a particularly weird character, but he's definitely plugged into the maelstrom. Weather Eye allows a character to open their mind using cool instead of weird, which I think better reflects Max's interactions with the maelstrom. Brief flashes of what may or may not be anxiety attacks, resulting in Max having to act under fire to stay tied to the real world.
Nice. I buy it. Yeah, there's a whole lot of psychic maelstrom stuff going on around Mad Max in this particular one. Starts with it, bleeds through in numerous scenes, and saves his can a few times, too.
It always pops up when the viewer is least expecting it, and you're kind of shaken by it and unnerved by it, which I think is the intent.
Yeah. All right, what other drivers do we have out here? You said it's a driver-tastic palooza.
All drivers all the time. It's my favorite playbook. This movie is all for me. I am the core demographic to be marketed to. Furiosa rings a little bit more true for the driver. She has a certain aesthetic to her, which reminds me a little bit more of how we would envision a battle babe or a gun lugger. I mean, just look at all the secret weapons stashed all over the war rig.
Yep.
But she doesn't really play the role of a battle babe or the gun lugger in the story. Furiosa comes with a car that features heavily in the movie, which is the war rig. We see her using the war rig as a weapon, which fits the move combat driver. She starts the plot by escaping the Citadel with the wives, which I can easily see her having eye on the door as a move to help with her escape during those chase sequences. There's definitely points in the film where Furiosa leads an escape and either has to leave things or people behind.
Those are really good arguments, especially the eye on the door. Well, that's good. I have to say those moves fit really well for what we've seen. I have thought, maybe you've changed my mind, but in my head coming into this, I thought of Furiosa as a chopper, except she betrayed her gang of war boys and adopted another gang, the Wives, and then the Vuvolini. She definitely uses Pack Alpha to push Ace, that's the head war boy, that she was bossing around as they went off on their not accepted mission. I kind of feel like she chose a new option for her gang as an advancement when they met the Vuvolini, which was swapping out Savage for well-disciplined.
Maybe she started as a chopper and then advanced into driver as the game went on?
The thing about Furiosa as driver is the special, the sex move, the big thing that certain people don't love about Apocalypse World, is that driver special is all about if you hook up with somebody, you got to show them that they don't mean that much to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
That just doesn't necessarily feel like a Furiosa thing. She says in the movie she's about redemption, and she pivots that moment when she goes from heading for the green place to finding out that it is no longer there. And she talks about the hope in others, and just that all feels so connected to the wives that she's saving, to the many mothers that she's seeking. And that's why I was thinking more like Chopper to me, even though they don't like people on an individual level. They lead a group. They definitely have to interact with folks, and that's where the Chopper was interesting for me for Furiosa. But let me throw this your way. Could Nux be a driver? He's that loner vibe of the Playbook, along with his driving skills. He and Capable totally hooked up. They totally did. Can't tell me otherwise. And Nux biffed it on his driver special. Here, the driver special, if you and another character have sex, roll plus cool. On a 10 plus, it's cool, no big deal. On a 7 to 9, give them +1 to their HX with you on their sheet, but give yourself -1 to your HX with them on yours. And here's where I say you missed it. On a miss, you gotta go. Take -1 ongoing until you prove that it's not like they own you or nothing. that's Nux. He had a -1
Oh,
ongoing.
no, it definitely is.
Ongoing for the whole movie.
Ever since that moment of intimacy, it's like, well, it's not like you mean anything to me or anything like that.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not going to go off in like flaming ball of glory because I had a romantic connection with you.
Oh, God. See, that's the moment. We think about it. He's got this -1 forward, so we got the trip back to the Citadel. Furiosa tells him, hey, if Slick gets ahead of the rig, they're going to drop spikes. So he moves up to the engine and sucks in some gasoline into his mouth to goose the engine. But he fails to do something under fire and then swallows some. So he takes harm and he looks mediocre. And then Max takes over and they move ahead with some help from Furiosa's gang. And then Max comes back in and asks if Nux is a black thumb. So he sends him under to fix the engines. Which he does. Driver much? Maybe? Huh? I think he's rolling HX to help Furiosa because the time when the engine is fixed is like the lowest point of the entire movie. And then later when Furiosa can't pull Max back up, it's Nux who kicks Max over to the other car and then saves his life and gives the war rig a big edge. So I think Nux is kind of an expert with help rolls. So I don't know. It's maybe more move related stuff than playbook related, but Nux is a driver. What do you think? Yay? Nay?
Okay. I buy it. He does have a cool car for as long as it lasts in the movie. Man, the MC for this game is such a dick.
Oh man, his hard moves are so hard.
Fine, your stuff's gone. Bye.
Okay, riddle me this. Mad Max in this movie is a battle babe. He has visions of death with Bullet Farmer, then with Rictus, and later with Immortan Joe. He definitely has perfect instincts. There are these moments where he's definitely reading the sitch and just going with the flow. He has no compunction about trying to be the hardest hard ass. He just does whatever it takes to survive.
I could buy it, especially with the Bullet Farmer scene, which we'll get into a little bit later on, which I still think is one of the more fascinating scenes in the whole movie for everything it doesn't show you, what's just implied.
Yes.
We talked a bit about how there's very few PCs in this game. Would you make the argument that any of the wives are player characters?
Hear me out. I think Splendid Angarad is a Skinner. She definitely has a high hot. Not in just the fact that she's beautiful, because all the wives are beautiful, right? But she's so charismatic. She's definitely the one that the other wives follow. She interfered in the Furiosa Max fight. She demanded no killing, and everyone stopped trying to murder Nux. Max demands that Splendid Angrod stay near during the negotiation with the motorcycle gang. And she also uses her body to protect the war rig from Immortan Joe. So I think those are all like player character things. But unfortunately, whoever was playing Splendid Angrod at the table had to bail the session early.
That must have been a really awkward question the day after the game. Hey, so what happened to my character after I left? I love this way of thinking about the Skinner in the context of Splendid, because I think it's easy to default into the Skinner and thinking that they only thrive in more urban or civilized environments in Apocalypse World. The idea of a Skinner that's out on the front lines and involved in battles seems really cool. It makes me want to roll up one right now.
Nice. You know, there are a couple of little moments because I watched a behind the scenes where they talked to the actresses who played the wives and they commented on how little actual dialogue they have. And Splendid Angrod has several nonverbal moments that are really telling. Not only the point where she tells the other wives, don't hurt Nux, he's a kamikaze, he's just a stupid war boy. Although she is the person who threw him out and said, who killed the world, so she threw him out of the war rig. He did survive. But there was also the moment in the fight with the Rock Riders where Furiosa's rifle's out of ammo. She tosses it onto Splendid Angrod's lap, says, reload me, and she looks at it, and you could see there's this moment of like, I don't want to be part of this killing. I don't even know what I'm doing. And that's when Toast grabs it from her and starts reloading the rifle. Those moments to me are just, that's what makes me feel like, there's a PC right there. There's a lot going on for Splendid Angrod.
So overall in this movie, there is a lot going on. There's not a lot of dialogue at points. I mean, yes, the wives didn't have a lot of lines, but neither did anyone else, really.
It's true. It's so much like a comic book. I mean, this is a movie that was created from storyboards rather than a per se script. There's so many visuals that tell the story and so many moments of looks between people or inanimate objects helping to tell the story.
Hello, listeners. This coming October, the Gauntlet will once again be putting on Gauntlet Con, our online gaming convention. Gauntlet Con will include guests, panels, a dedicated Discord server for mustering, and lots of RPG sessions. Many will be streamed and recorded. Gauntlet Con runs October 24th through 27th with events throughout those days to cover many time zones. If you're interested in our newsletter for Gauntlet Con, you can sign up at gauntlet-rpg.com/gauntlet-con-2019. Gauntlet Con's a great gaming experience, and I hope you'll consider joining us as a GM, a player, or a viewer.
Let's move on to our next segment where we're going to explore what scenes of the movie could easily translate to Apocalypse World and how they could be played. Spend some time reflecting on the actual action sequence and plots rather than the characters themselves.
Okay.
I got a bit of a hot take here.
Okay, hot take away.
The first 30 minutes of this movie are either a love letter for a one-shot game or the result of an in-depth history discussion at a home game.
Okay.
Once you get over the first 30 minutes, that's the first point of the movie where all the characters have been at the same place at the same time and able to interact. With the exception of the failed escape attempt in the opening, Max doesn't have any autonomy. The wives aren't really established. So the first 30 minutes plus the sandstorm sequence establishes everyone's starting relationships. Max is Nux's blood bag. Nux knows both Furiosa and the wives from their roles in the Citadel. Furiosa is helping the wives escape. It's interesting to note these are all unbalanced relationships, which could be developed with history. Nux sees Furiosa as an authority figure gone rogue from the Citadel, but Nux is just another nameless war boy to Furiosa and the wives.
That is fascinating. Wow. That totally is. Like, that is, if this were a bunch of player characters, you would pick up after all of that first half hour, after the sandstorm. Maybe even after the fight between the three. Yeah. No, I could see that. That it doesn't hit the table until after the sandstorm.
That's where you get like a lot of that beginning, like, okay, you're all in a scene talk to each other almost, which immediately descends into violence. But that's the type of game this is.
Yeah. Okay, it feels to me like nobody rolls a 10 plus during any action sequence in this entire frickin' movie.
Okay, there is totally one point where there is a 10 plus rolled in an action sequence. It was even an inside joke with my gaming friends for a while. Consider how the bullet farmer goes out. Max runs off into the fog to deal with the bullet farmer. We see an explosion in the distance. Max comes back covered in other people's blood. It was apparently easy enough that he was thoughtful with the gear he brought back for everyone at the war rig. That's a 10 plus roll if I ever saw one. Not that we ever actually saw the roll and the immediate results.
Oh man, that's perfect. Yes, that is definitely a 10 plus. And did we need to see it? I think not. Like, just the explosion and then the silhouette of him walking back, that was pretty awesome.
It's so well done. It's also so terrible and awful. So maybe we don't need to see it.
Yes. Oh, that moment of like, are you okay? Huh? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then Furiosa said, that's not his blood. Like, she just knows. She knows it's
so good.
Yes. And he washes himself with mother's milk. There's so many weird bits of that. Oh, gorgeous. All right, let's move on.
I think this is a good time to spotlight the nature of the action sequences in the movie and how they could be played out in Apocalypse World. We talk a lot about failing forward with Powered by the Apocalypse play. That term can give the impression that player characters are failing due to incompetence, but somehow the plot still managed to roll forward because the PCs are the PCs. I can think of examples of this in other pieces of media where our takeaway is that's not supposed to happen. Those lean a little bit more comedic. Thinking of failing forward in more badass, empowering ways, that can be tricky. There's a lot of failing forward that happens in this movie. Almost all the action sequences feature it in some fashion or another. It's never used in a way to punch down on the characters for the audience's amusement. Rather, you can see how the action sequences are a series of 7 and 9s or 6 minuses that keep snowballing because of how determined, stubborn, or vicious the characters are.
Yeah.
You could see a good example of this with the sequence after the sandstorm, where Furiosa and Max fight at the war rig. We open with Furiosa pinning Max and triggering her single combat move, rolling a 6 minus, and that gun she has in her hand, it doesn't work. That's not a punchline to a bad roll, because Furiosa then tries to slam Max with the gun instead. A lot of the sequence that follows involves what could be described as flailing in the sand, with neither side really gaining an upper hand, even though other player characters are helping and hindering the situation. Again, these are misses or partial successes, but they build up these characters and reveal a lot of who they are to each other. What I love the most about this sequence, though, from an Apocalypse World perspective, is how it ends. Max finally manages to have Furiosa pinned and confirms that the second gun that entered the battle a little bit prior works. But there's this moment after his victory where he looks to the side and sees that the war rig has been followed and the war boys are on the horizon. So did Max end this battle with a 10 plus, or did he end combat with a 6 minus? Because sure, you stopped Furiosa, but there's a lot of off-screen badness coming in over the horizon.
Oh, that is so sharp, Rach. Nicely done.
What scene stood out to you, Rich? What could be playable in an Apocalypse World game?
There's a scene where Nux is chasing Furiosa into the maelstrom. This is the pre-sandstorm. So maybe this is like part of our HX, or maybe this is the opening move from a love letter. I don't know. But Nux is chasing Furiosa into the maelstrom. Maelstrom? Psychic maelstrom, anyone? I don't know. He decides to make his own car a bomb to stop her. You know, this is the point where he opens up all of the valves and there's this nitro or petrol or gasoline pouring into the floorboards of his cool little coupe. And he screams to Mad Max, "Witness me, blood bag!" So Mad Max uses his HX to interfere and pushes the roll to a failure. The car crashes, Nux rolls 10 plus on his hard move, and the MC decides that he's knocked unconscious. Due to the fail, the car doesn't explode, and we end that scene with a flare glinting in the maelstrom. A little side bit about quiet after hard moves. So after the big moment when the huge explosion happens, when the coupe is destroyed, and boy was it destroyed, the MC of this movie cuts the scene and follows with moments of quiet. I love this. It gives the viewers a chance to take a breath, and it will work wonders at your table too, to allow people to have that reaction moment. It's just chef's kiss.
I think that's a great thing to point out and consider. I think as MCs, we can too quickly hit on a hard move and then shove the game along to the next big thing without giving that moment for our players to breathe and think about how screwed over they actually are right now.
There's something to say for taking a breather or hard move, take a bio break. You know, there's just something really good about that. Oh, here's another scene. The scene where Furiosa tries to negotiate with the Rock Riders gang for safe passage. You know, she goes out, she knows that this is not going to go well. She tells Mad Max, who won't give his name, if I say fool, you need to take off driving. She goes out to negotiate with them. Rock Riders are pretty pissed because there are 3 war parties coming. And she fails that manipulation roll to try to seal that deal. It sets off a countdown clock for Splendid Angarod's contractions, which then alerts the Rock Riders to some kind of treachery afoot and sets off a huge battle. That, to me, is a great way to represent a countdown clock, right? This countdown clock for Angarod is almost like the countdown clock before that character's time is done in the game. Because that's the first time that she had a contraction.
Mm-hmm.
And it continues forward to the point where she's getting cut up by the quote-unquote doctor, organic mechanic. That's why that's the character's name, by the way, the organic mechanic.
I totally buy how you came up with that name.
No, that's his name in the movie.
No. How they would have come up with that name.
Okay, let me throw this out here. The Boot.
All right, The Boot. Yes.
All right. Now, props to Lindsay Ellis, who has her own YouTube channel. She talked about this, and this kind of got me looking along those lines. The Boot in Apocalypse World is a custom move. Whoever has the boot gets a +1. Max uses his boot to kick Slit off of him and keep him from being thrown from Nux's car. When Max woke up before Nux, he took Nux's boot. Slit later uses Max's boot to convince Immortan Joe to let him ride with the main war party. Later, Max takes out the Bullet Town boys and comes back with that very thoughtful set of gifts, including a boot for Nux. The use of that inanimate object in such interesting ways that communicate many different things in a nonverbal way. I just had to mechanize it somehow.
Do you think in this theoretical Apocalypse World game, this is a result of the players gravitating towards something ridiculous, and then the GM is like, okay, I'm just going to roll with this forever?
Okay, fine, it's a custom move. Here, let's just write it up. Yes.
Here's your friggin' boot, guys. God.
Now, here's a moment in the movie that helps communicate to me the idea of leverage, right? In manipulation or seduction, you need to have some kind of leverage, a thing that you are offering. Furiosa comes up to Max as he's sitting in the war rig. He's kind of sort of tried to steal it, but failed because of the kill switches. She tells Max, you know, you just hurt one of Immortan Joe's favorites. He's not going to be happy. Max doesn't move. She tells Max, you know, you've probably got like a 5-minute head start before these guys show up, and it's not going to be pretty. Max does not even move. Then Furiosa asks him, do you want that thing off of your face? Now she has leverage, rolls for manipulation, hits it, the 10+, he lets her into the rig. That's leverage. I love that moment.
Oh, that's definitely an escalation of, okay, I'm just going to do the move now. This soft social skills thing isn't working.
That's true. You know, there's some people who don't like the idea of social mechanics in their games because, hey, we can talk. But you've hit on one of the big advantages of having social moves is that we can talk. You and I, we can talk all we want in character. But a move helps us to come to a resolution sometimes when a resolution is not easy to find. It helps us to put a pin in that and pivot to something new. So I think that's a really sharp way of breaking down a social mechanic and the value of it right there.
I totally agree because we've seen that scene play out at gaming tables where two player characters are just butting heads and not able to come to a resolution. And then that mechanic presents the opportunity for a resolution.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like social moves might be a topic for a future podcast episode as well.
Oh, yeah. Let's put that on the parking lot. One last little bit. You mentioned Max having Weather Eye as a move, and I totally get where you're coming from. He sees that psychic maelstrom vision of a young girl and something's coming at him. He throws up his hand to protect his forehead. And then later he's nearly shot by a crossbow bolt, but his life is saved when he puts his hand up in the exact same way. I love that. I love that setup and payoff as the way to represent. He gets really good, clear information for opening his brain to the psychic maelstrom, acts on it, and is safe as can. And even like step more, he's laying there unconscious and hears her, hey, get up. And then it's her, it's the vision young girl, but it's also one of the Vuvalinas trying to wake him up at the same time. And that reality and psychic maelstrom mixing together, really cool and vivid.
Definitely something to keep in mind when bringing your Apocalypse World games to the table, because the Maelstrom, I know for some MCs and players, can be a little bit tricky to wrap their heads around.
It really can. I've played in games where the MC would say, what's the psychic maelstrom like for you? And so every player character had a different filter or lens on how the psychic maelstrom looked for them. I've played in games where the MC and the psychic maelstrom have an agenda, and they are portrayed in very specific ways. And having that voice, that weird voice, is helpful for an MC. There are a lot of different ways to do it. And no one way is right or wrong as long as you're applying the rules as they're intended and the group all is part of that conversation. Because another thing from Apocalypse World is saying that role-playing is a conversation.
The details are left vague for a reason.
And speaking of conversations, this one probably should be brought to an end. I gotta say, you and I think we could talk about Fury Road for a long time. Let's just say that we talked for almost an hour before we started recording. There is no perfect way to talk about Fury Road or Apocalypse World 2nd Edition. There's so much. What was the you had an analogy for this particular movie. What was that cake analogy?
Oh, right. Well, I guess to back up, I'm a media nerd, and I have been comparing various pieces of media to pastries because I'm also a pastry nerd. And there was a type of cake I encountered once called an opera cake, which the story I was told about why it was called an opera cake, and no guarantees that this is true or not, is that each layer of the cake, and it's one of these beautiful pieces of cake with different layers like mousses and ganaches and cake, etc. But each of those layers is supposed to represent a different act of an opera. So you're cutting through all these different layers and you're having a different experience with different parts of the cake mixing in with each other and all the flavors combining. And I had described it to Rich as it's like digging into this beautiful piece of cake where every time you take another bite, you realize something new or you experience something new. You see something, the background you didn't see before. Because I can't speak for you, Rich, but when I was rewatching the movie and watching clips, there's all these moments of, oh, shoot, I didn't notice this before.
Oh, man. It wasn't until the maybe 8th time that I realized that the dag is also pregnant. What? I missed that? How did I miss that 7 previous times? You know, or that the women, the mini mothers, they call themselves the Vuvalina. They just, oh man. And then rewatching it, and I'm just saying this because I really want everyone listening to this podcast to give this a shot. If you have it on Blu-ray, you should be able to watch the descriptive audio for the visually impaired audio track of this movie is really, really interesting. Super good.
You also said watching this movie with subtitles is fascinating because it shows you all the background noise and chatter and what's actually being said.
I know, there's so much. There's so much that you miss. It's great. Oh, man. There's so many different ways to watch this movie, and I don't think any of them are wrong. I love this movie. I was having a conversation with my buddy Greg over the week leading up to this, and he said it was his favorite action movie ever made, and I think I'm with him. Listeners, I'm sure that you have opinions about Apocalypse World 2nd Edition and or Mad Max Fury Road. We would love to hear those opinions. You can find us, and of course in the outro of the show, you'll hear about our +1forward, +1FWD is our Twitter. We also now have, for those folks who don't like the Twitter, and that's A-okay, we have an email address as well. You can reach us at +1forward@gmail.com. So feel free to reach out there, but we would love to hear from you on Twitter, or you can hop on over to the Gauntlet forums, because there will be a post about that. Free to join those forums, participate in the conversation, meet lots of awesome other PbtA fanatics, because we're there too. Rach, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom about this particular piece of amazing film.
Thank you for geeking out with me for, God, we've been going for several hours now, not all on mic about this movie.
No regrets. No regrets at all.
+1forward is a production of the Gauntlet community, Richard Rogers and Rach Shelkey. You can find us at gauntlet-rpg.com or follow us on Twitter at +1FWD. If you would like to support our show, visit our Patreon site at patreon.com/gauntlet. The games mentioned on this show use the Apocalypse engine, which is a creation of Vincent and Magay Baker. The music for +1forward is from the Savage Aural Hotbed CD Gomi Daiko. The songs used are Gomi Daiko, Metal Version, and Hammer of Bill. You can find more amazing tunes by Savage Aural Hotbed on their website, www.savageauralhotbed.com.